Well, Doctor, I got scarlet fever once. I had no sympathy from my wife on that. But actually, to this day, I have the effects of that. It attacks the pulmonary organs.
This is the story of how one of Britain's most beloved television marriages fell apart behind closed doors, and why Eamonn Holmes stayed silent about it for nearly 2 years. 27 years together, 14 of those as husband and wife. To the viewing public, Eamonn Holmes and Ruth Langsford were the golden couple of daytime television, warm and familiar, and seemingly unshakable. But in 2024, their marriage quietly collapsed, and for months only one side of the story made it into the headlines. Ruth spoke, Ruth shaped the narrative, and Ruth defined how the public understood what went wrong. Eamonn said nothing, no interviews, no clarifications, no defense, complete silence for nearly 2 years. But now at 66 years old, and after everything he has been through, Eamonn Holmes is finally speaking up. And what he is saying does not just add to the story, it changes the entire picture. It reframes how the breakup looks, how Ruth comes across in the aftermath, and what really went wrong between two people who spent nearly 3 decades building a life together. What exactly did Eamonn Holmes say? And why did he wait this long to say it? What does it reveal about the marriage that millions of viewers thought they knew? We are going to take you through all the details, starting with the rise, moving through the silence, and ending with the side of the story you never heard. The making of Eamonn Holmes. Long before the headlines and the breakups and the carefully worded public statements, Eamonn Holmes was just a boy from Belfast, learning how to hold a room. Holy Family Primary School came first, then St. Malachy's College, and later the Dublin College of Business Studies. Nothing about that path screamed celebrity, but what it did suggest was discipline, routine, and an early comfort with structure. That would matter later because Holmes built his entire career on being dependable when everything else was live, unpredictable, and often chaotic. 1979 brought his first real break when he walked into Ulster Television as a young presenter and reporter on farming Ulster. Glamorous it was not, and national it definitely was not, but it was real broadcasting, and it taught him how to think on his feet and speak to people without performing at them. Sports coverage came next, working alongside seasoned reporters and learning the mechanics of live television the hard way through repetition and pressure and long hours. By 1982, Ulster Television trusted him enough to hand him the anchor's chair on Good Evening Ulster, their flagship news program, a role previously held by Gloria Hunniford. That was a quiet but meaningful vote of confidence, because Holmes was not just reading scripts anymore. Now he was shaping conversations, setting the tone, and becoming a familiar face in Northern Irish homes. News was not where he stopped either. Pageants, specials, and live events all came his way, and he proved he could move between serious and light without losing credibility. When he left Ulster Television in 1986 to join the BBC, it was not an escape but a promotion. Manchester became his new base as part of Open Air on BBC One, broadcasting nationally and learning what it meant to speak to millions instead of thousands. And that is when everything truly changed. 1993 saw Holmes join GMTV, where he helped launch its very first broadcast. Morning television is unforgiving because you are live, you are early, and you are expected to be sharp when the rest of the country is half awake. Holmes thrived in that environment, becoming part of people's routines, the voice that eased them into the day, even when tensions surfaced behind the scenes, including a well-publicized falling out with Anthea Turner. He stayed put and remained grounded in the role. 12 years at GMTV ended in 2005, and when he walked away, he did not do it quietly. The show had drifted away from real news and leaned too heavily into celebrity fluff, and he made that clear to anyone who would listen. That honesty followed him. 6 months later, Sky News brought him into Front Sunrise, and once again Holmes settled into the rhythm of early mornings, rotating co-hosts but keeping the tone steady and conversational. What made him stand out over the years was his range. Snooker, darts, horse racing, tennis, quiz shows, panel shows, faith programs like Songs of Praise, game shows like Jet Set. Prestige was never what he chased. Consistency was. 2006 brought This Morning into his life, and Holmes leaned into what he did best, making live television feel unscripted but safe. That approach reached its peak when he began presenting alongside Ruth Langsford, because on screen they were easy, familiar, and believable. Together they fronted shows like Gift Wrapped and Eamonn and Ruth How the Other Half Lives, turning their real-life partnership into a television brand. For viewers it felt natural, and for Holmes it became inseparable from how the public saw him. But the industry was changing behind the scenes. 2020 brought a tribunal case over his freelance status under IR35 rules, and Holmes lost. That moment forced him to publicly defend not just his contract but his value, and he described himself as one of the best live presenters in the country. Whether people agreed or not, the confidence was unmistakable. Radio had always been his other lane. Downtown radio in the late 80s, Radio 5 Live, Magic 105.4, Radio 2, and later talk radio all gave him a space where he could talk longer, dig deeper, and be less polished. That was where his opinions came through most clearly, where audiences heard him without the filter of studio lights. GB News came calling in 2022, and he launched a breakfast show with Isabel Webster, a place where he felt appreciated again, where journalism came first, and where rules could be bent just enough to make the conversation real. And now, after decades of being the steady one, the reliable one, the man who rarely explained himself, Holmes is talking again. Not as a presenter reading headlines, but as a man finally stepping out from behind them. Eamonn and Ruth, the private love story. Their love story did not begin as a public romance or a television pairing designed for audiences to fall in love with. It began quietly, deliberately, almost cautiously, at a time when both timing and restraint mattered more than excitement. 1997 was when Eamonn Holmes met Ruth Langsford through their mutual friend Sally Mean, and there was no rush to define what they were or announce it to the world. Holmes had separated from his first wife Gabrielle 2 years earlier, and the decision was made early on to keep the relationship private. Not out of secrecy, but out of respect, and that choice, made long before cameras followed their every move, quietly set the tone for everything that followed. When they did start dating, the relationship stayed firmly out of public view. Years later, Ruth would look back on that period and explain that Eamonn's insistence on privacy only deepened her feelings for him, that it revealed the kind of man he was, the kind of father he aimed to be, and the level of integrity he carried into his personal life. Far from making her feel hidden, it made her feel secure. 2 years passed before they finally went public, and by then the relationship was already rooted in something solid. Life moved forward quickly after that. 2002 brought their son Jack into the world, a moment that quietly changed the center of everything. Ruth later revealed she discovered she was pregnant just 1 day before her godson Charlie's christening, and because Eamonn was away at the time, she shared the news first with her best friend Sam, Charlie's mum. It was an intimate moment shared in confidence, one of those life events that does not need witnesses to feel real. By 2006, their personal and professional lives began to fully intertwine. 9 years into their relationship, Eamonn joined Ruth on the Friday edition of This Morning, where Ruth was already established, having been part of it since 1999 and quietly becoming its longest-serving presenter. Working side by side was not something they pretended was easy. Ruth openly acknowledged that working with your partner came with challenges, even as she admitted they managed it most of the time. As the years passed, they became one of daytime television's most recognizable partnerships. Gift Wrapped, How the Other Half Lives, Lose a Stone in 4 Weeks, Eamonn and Ruth's 7-Year Itch, and Do the Right Thing all featured them together, and their chemistry became part of their public identity. The line between marriage and brand slowly blurred. Holmes leaned into it with humor, once joking that leaving television simply was not an option because viewers would not stand for it. At the time it sounded playful, but in hindsight, it felt like a commitment that went deeper than either of them realized. 13 years after they first met, and 5 years after Eamonn's divorce from Gabrielle was finalized, they married at Elvetham Hall in Hampshire. That was 2010. Soon after came a 6-bedroom house in Weybridge, Surrey, reportedly worth over £3 million. It looked like the final piece clicking into place. Stability, success, permanence. Speaking years later on Strictly Come Dancing, Ruth described a marriage built on understanding. Eamonn, she explained, was the first to tease her and just as quickly the first to surprise her with thoughtfulness. Even when she was consumed by the demands of the competition, she trusted that he understood her completely, and that she believed was why they worked. And that is when things started to shift. November 2020 brought an abrupt change when Eamonn and Ruth were dropped from This Morning and replaced by Alison Hammond and Dermot O'Leary. The decision left them furious. Professionally, it was a blow, but personally, it marked the beginning of a clear divide. Ruth remained with ITV and continued her presence on Loose Women, while Eamonn moved in a different direction entirely, joining GB News to host a breakfast show. For the first time in years, their careers were no longer aligned, and the distance between them was no longer just professional. May 2024 brought the public confirmation that their marriage was over and that they were in the process of divorcing. A spokesperson explained that work commitments had taken their marriage in different directions. The message was calm and controlled and carefully worded. They were determined to stay friends and keep things amicable. But behind those carefully worded statements sat the end of a relationship that had once been built on patience, privacy, and shared purpose. And behind that ending sat something else too. Something that had been wearing them down long before the marriage finally gave way. The pain that didn't end when the cameras cut. For years the audience saw strength. What they did not see was how much of that strength was borrowed. Behind the familiar voice and steady on-screen presence, Eamonn Holmes was fighting a body that was beginning to fail him piece by piece. Ruth Langsford stood firmly at his side through it all, offering support, reassurance, and optimism. But now, with their marriage over and Holmes entering a new phase of life alone, those years of illness no longer feel like background noise. They feel like the pressure point where everything began to shift. Holmes never hid his health struggles. He spoke about them often, sometimes with humor, sometimes with brutal honesty. Long before the marriage unraveled, his body was already under siege. Years of acute pain eventually led to a double hip replacement in 2016, a 3.75-hour operation after he had lived with constant discomfort for far too long. At the time, he compared the experience to live television, admitting there were nerves in the build-up, but none once it began. The surreal moment when people paid him emotional tributes the night before surgery stuck with him because it felt eerily like saying goodbye without actually going anywhere. Waking up to see a smiling surgeon, his wife, and a lunch menu brought a strange sense of relief, and he joked that it confirmed he must still be alive. That humor, that instinct to perform even through pain, became a recurring theme. 2018 brought something worse. On what should have been a joyful family milestone, Holmes was struck down by shingles on the very day of his son Declan's wedding. The virus left his face swollen, marked, and unrecognizable. Years later, during an appearance on Loose Women, he shared images of the ordeal and spoke candidly about how brutal it was, explaining how shingles lies dormant in the body for most adults and can strike without warning. Looking at the photos on screen, he compared himself to Quasimodo and acknowledged just how shocking the condition had been. But 2021 marked the beginning of his most devastating decline. That spring, completely out of nowhere, Holmes developed severe back pain that refused to ease. The pain worsened rapidly, eventually leaving him reliant on a walking stick. What followed was the discovery that changed everything. 3 slipped discs, all affecting the movement of his right leg. The diagnosis explained the pain, but offered no relief. By the end of that year, Holmes admitted his condition had taken a heavy toll, not just on him, but on his family. Days existed when he could not walk at all, when he could not bend down, when he could not manage basic tasks, and had to rely on Ruth for help. His sons were embarrassed by the way he moved, and the loss of independence was as painful as the condition itself. Scans showed the protruding discs, but even then, Holmes hoped the problem might resolve on its own. It did not. Epidural injections offered partial relief, but not a solution. Life became increasingly restricted, and the hope that surgery would be a quick fix slowly slipped away. By the time doctors explained that other spinal and nerve issues needed to be addressed first, Holmes admitted he was crushed. 1 year in severe pain and desperately wanting an answer, and the answer was more waiting. September 2022 brought vital spinal surgery and a step away from his GB News show. It was meant to be the turning point, but instead it opened the door to an even harsher reality. Despite intense physiotherapy, Holmes found that his mobility remained limited. Depending on others for simple tasks felt soul-destroying, and even sitting still for hours after physio sessions filled him with guilt, as though resting itself had become another burden. The surgery also left his left leg weakened, and just over 2 weeks into recovery, disaster struck. Holmes fell backwards down 18 stairs at his home in Weybridge and slammed into the stone floor below. The accident could easily have killed him. Instead, he emerged with a broken shoulder and further damage to his already weakened legs. That fracture was a massive setback, forcing more time away from work and resetting his expectations yet again. Even then, the setbacks did not stop. September 2023, a full year after the surgery, brought a spine and neck stretching procedure, and Holmes admitted openly that he still could not walk properly. Running was impossible, walking was impossible, and most of what he could do involved sitting and watching television. It was not the recovery he had hoped for, not even close. By 2024, his focus was entirely on recovery. Daily physiotherapy became routine, and a cane or wheelchair became necessary. Ruth continued to support him publicly, but she admitted something had changed. Acceptance that he would never be 100% right might have to come, she acknowledged, speaking about living in hope while also recognizing how testing long-term care can be, even for the strongest families. Now, with their marriage over, those words land differently. What once sounded like resilience now feels like resignation. The phone call Ruth was never meant to hear. For months, the end of Eamonn Holmes and Ruth Langsford's marriage was explained away with careful language. Health struggles, career pressures, two people drifting in different directions. It sounded reasonable, almost gentle, but behind closed doors, the real ending did not unfold slowly or quietly. It arrived in a single devastating moment, a moment Ruth was never meant to hear. And once she did, everything they had left simply fell apart. According to reports, the marriage ended after Ruth made what has been described as a shocked discovery. Inside their Surrey home, Eamonn believed he was alone, comfortable and unobserved. While chatting on the phone, he had no idea Ruth was elsewhere in the house. But she could hear him, and what she heard was not harmless conversation. It was described as intimate, cozy, personal. Ruth was said to be horrified. Confrontation came immediately, and the shock cut both ways. Eamonn reportedly had no idea she was even there, and by the time he found out Ruth had heard everything, the damage was already done. For Ruth, the moment landed especially hard because of everything that had come before it. Years spent standing by him through severe health struggles, surgeries, chronic pain, and loss of mobility. Devoted to caring for him when his body failed him, to then overhear him sharing intimate chats with another woman was not just painful, it felt like betrayal, a real kick in the teeth. And that moment was only the beginning. Sources say that after the phone call confrontation, the marriage did not end straight away. It limped on, bruised and fragile. But just weeks later, Ruth reportedly made another discovery, and this time it was not something overheard. Messages found on Eamonn's laptop. According to reports, that discovery changed everything. Whatever hope remained disappeared. Insiders described it as the straw that broke the camel's back. The timeline matters here. The argument over the phone call reportedly happened in April. The laptop messages followed weeks later, and shortly after that, the public announcement arrived. Calm, controlled, carefully worded. A joint statement confirmed that their marriage was over and that they were in the process of divorcing. No explanation, no emotion, just a full stop at the end of 27 years together. Fans were stunned when the news broke. 14 years of marriage, nearly 3 decades as a couple, gone just like that. Not long after the separation became public, Eamonn moved on and went public with a new relationship with Katie Alexander. Ruth remained publicly single, focusing on herself and her friendships and quietly rebuilding her life, recently marking her birthday with a girls' getaway. For a long time, Ruth said nothing, and then she finally spoke. Her first interview since the split saw Ruth open up about what she described as a difficult and painful breakup, acknowledging how hard it had been to process the end of a marriage and a relationship that had spanned most of her adult life. But there was no bitterness in her words, just resolve. When a relationship breaks down, whether it is a marriage or a friendship, you reach a crossroads, she explained. You either let yourself crumble, or you pick yourself up and move forward. And she chose to move forward. She admitted she was not delighted that her marriage was over, but she had accepted it, and that acceptance was what allowed her to embrace being single again and make choices that were just about her. Not about holding something together, not about compromise, just about herself. Sharing a 22-year-old son Jack with Eamonn, she spoke carefully but honestly. She also addressed the added weight of going through a divorce in the public eye. Breakups are painful enough in private, she explained, but when every move is watched and commented on and dissected, it becomes even harder. Still, she acknowledged that scrutiny comes with the job, and if you cannot handle it, you probably should not be doing it. When asked about being on her own again, Ruth did not pretend it was simple. Fine being alone, but not forever. She put it, a difference exists between enjoying a weekend to yourself and realizing that every weekend might now be yours alone. That reality takes adjustment. Eamonn Holmes breaks his silence. And that is exactly where the story shifts. Because while Ruth Langsford was focused on moving forward, the same moment pushed Eamonn Holmes in the opposite direction. Instead of looking ahead, he started looking back. Not with blame, not with anger, but with the kind of reflection that only shows up after everything has already fallen apart. Almost 2 years after his marriage to Ruth Langsford came apart, Eamonn Holmes is finally looking back, instead of pushing forward. And what he is admitting now does not sound like bitterness or blame. It sounds like something heavier, regret. Not loud, not dramatic, just the kind that settles in when everything else has already happened and there is no way to rewind it. A new interview saw Holmes reflect on the life he built and the one that slipped away alongside it, and he admitted that if he could go back and change anything, he would try to find a better balance between his career and his personal life. Not a scandal, not a denial, just a simple sentence that says more than pages of explanation ever could, and here is what stood out most. When asked about his biggest regret, the question was left unanswered intentionally. Sometimes what someone does not say carries the most weight. Eamonn and Ruth co-presented This Morning together for years before announcing their separation in May 2024, after 14 years of marriage. Their relationship stretched back even further, beginning in 1997 and producing one son, now 22. For decades their lives were intertwined on screen and off. So when the split came, it landed as more than a breakup. It felt like the end of an era. Since then, both have moved forward, but in very different ways. Holmes began dating relationship counselor Katie Alexander, while Ruth leaned into independence. She has been open about how her fear slowly gave way to clarity, admitting that at first everything felt dark and overwhelming and uncertain, but over time the fear faded, and what replaced it surprised her. Confidence, calm, even excitement. Relationships and marriage have not put her off, she explained, but she is not actively searching either. The real revelation was realizing how capable she is on her own. Independent, strong, comfortable in her own space. What once felt scary now feels like an open chapter rather than a void. While Ruth was rebuilding emotionally, Eamonn's body was continuing to betray him. Following the separation came further medical procedures, including major spinal surgery and a double hip replacement after years of severe back pain. The year had been brutal, he admitted, and he would be glad to see the back of it. Publicly, he acknowledged something even harder. Effectively disabled for over a year, relying on carers for basic daily tasks. He described the experience as humiliating and humbling, even as he expressed gratitude for the help he received. Ruth turned inward in the meantime. Counseling began after the separation and continues to this day, and she spoke about how powerful and grounding it has been. Therapy as a space free from judgment, assumptions, or history. Someone who listens, someone who asks the right questions, someone who helps you understand why certain moments land the way they do. Even though she knows herself well, therapy has helped her process everything more calmly. Professionally, Ruth has thrived. Her career has flourished, and she has even hinted at a possible return to This Morning. When asked about presenting alongside Rylan Clark, she did not hesitate. If they asked, she would say yes, especially with Rylan, whom she described as a TV son, someone she adores, someone she already has an easy rhythm with. The door clearly is not closed. Lighter moments have come too. During a recent Loose Women discussion about former Prime Minister David Cameron's health, fellow panelist Mylene Klaas joked that men live longer when they are married, while women live longer when they are not. Ruth's reaction was quick and telling. "Good to know," she responded, laughing along with the audience. Brief, playful, but sharp enough to land. Despite everything, the connection has not completely vanished. Over Christmas, Eamonn reached out to Ruth to express continued respect and wish her all the best. Speaking at a festive awards dinner, he said plainly that she deserved happiness. Simple words, but the timing mattered, because even amid divorce proceedings, there was still an attempt at grace. That same Christmas saw Eamonn spend the holidays with Katie, staying at a luxury cottage in North Yorkshire. He spoke openly about his hopes for the future too. Still relying on a walking frame, he admitted mobility remains a daily challenge, but he set his sights on improvement by 2026 and is even considering pioneering stem cell treatment. The determination, at least, has not left him. And so this chapter ends not with closure, but with reflection. A man looking back and admitting imbalance. A woman stepping forward and discovering strength. Two lives that once ran in parallel are now moving on separate tracks. No shouting, no spectacle, just the quiet weight of everything that cannot be undone. For 27 years, Eamonn Holmes and Ruth Langsford built something the public believed in, a partnership that felt real, because in many ways it was. They raised a son together, worked side by side, weathered health crises and career setbacks and the relentless pressure of being watched. But somewhere along the way, the cracks formed. And by the time either of them noticed, it was already too late. Eamonn stayed silent for nearly 2 years. Now that he has spoken, his words are not explosive, not vengeful. They are simply honest. He wishes he had found more balance. He regrets what he cannot name. And he is still, even now, trying to put one foot in front of the other. Ruth has chosen a different path. She has embraced the uncertainty, leaned into her own strength, and made peace with the fact that some things, no matter how long they last, are not meant to be forever. What are your thoughts on everything that went down between Eamonn and Ruth? Let us know in the comments below. If this story moved you, do not forget to like, share, and subscribe, and click the next video on your screen because you will enjoy it.